Good morning. Today we're starting a 3-week sermon series on what I'm calling Answers for Atheists. We've done this in the fall. Last fall we talked about religion and politics. The year before that we talked about religion and science. I didn't think religion and atheism was the right title, so I really want to unpack kind of some answers, because we all have doubts. We all run into people who doubt the existence of God or doubt that God exists. And so how can we help ourselves understand some of those things and some of the things that undergird our faith? And so we're going to be talking about Answers for Atheists over the next couple weeks. But as we get started with this, I want to give a couple background things. The first thing I want to do is actually look at some of the Pew Research Center. They did a study last year in 2012 about the religious landscape of the United States and the population. And one of the things I just want to point out is that 97% of the U.S. citizenship believes that God exists. So that's the good news. 97% of us say that we believe God exists or the possibility of God exists. Does that make sense? 77% are certain, but the rest, the 20% are saying, well, it's a possibility. Now, what has changed over the past 5 years is that both those who say they're agnostic and those who say they're atheist has grown a little bit over that same time period and over the past 5 years. Agnostics make up about, self-identified, about 3.3% of the U.S. population are agnostic, and I'll unpack who an agnostic is in a little bit. And then another 2.4% identify themselves as atheists. So that's kind of religious landscape. And I thought, well, why, it's not a big part of our population. Not going to see a whole lot of atheists in church, obviously. Matt, why are you preaching this? Well, here's what I think is happening. I want to take you a look at this next chart. This was people's response to the statement, "I never doubt the existence of God." That was the statement, and people either agree with it or disagree. That top line you'll see, from 1987 for over 10 years, people, pretty much 88% of the population said, "I never doubt the existence of God," and about 10% said, "I do doubt the existence of God." Does that make sense? So that happens. But you notice what in 2012 at the end, now it's 80% of the U.S. population say they never doubt, and 18% are now saying they do doubt. So the doubt among us is growing, is what it's saying. But I want to point out one more thing. I want you to notice where the doubt begins. You can't see it on this chart very clearly because it's not numbered. It's after 1997. The graph starts to change after 2001. And what happened in the United States in 2001 that might lead us to doubt the existence of God? 9/11, right. We had a national event where people flew planes into the World Trade Centers. They flew those planes in, and it was the part of the issue was it was attached to religion. It was religious. There were religious reasons attached to that attack, not just political reasons. There were political reasons as well, but it got associated with religion. And so and people would say, well, if that's the God, I don't want to have anything to do with God. You see what I'm saying? If that's the kind of God, I don't want to follow that kind of God. I don't want to believe in that kind of God, and I agree with them. I 100% agree with that. But it started to cause us to doubt the existence of God because we start to ask the question of why. Why did God allow this to happen? And we could say that about our own personal tragedies as well. And so that creates doubt in us. Yet, faith lives with doubt, not without it. And we'll talk about that a little bit before we close this sermon this morning. But I want you to notice not only how that happens, but also want to unpack. So we got that doubt increasing in the U.S. population. I also want to kind of lay out what the difference is between an atheist, agnostic, and someone who believes in God. So I have these sunglasses I wear, and these aren't them on the screen, but I have these sunglasses I wear when I go biking. And what's cool about them is I can change the lenses in them. I have frames, but then I can kind of this is kind of a neat guy thing, but I have these lenses, and I can put orange lenses in or yellow lenses in or reflective lenses in. If it's too bright, I can get them to reflect the sun. If I'm riding through the woods and it's shadows, I'll put the orange lenses in because it brightens everything up when I ride and I can see better. And so depending on the lenses I'm wearing, it changes my perspective on the world around me. It's true, our religious lenses, our lenses of belief, impact how we see the world around us and how we make sense of the world around us and other people and what's happening in the world, things like 9/11, other things. So whatever our lenses are, that's going to influence how we make sense of the world and the universe. So here are the different lenses that people wear. Now, a theist wears a lens that says, a theist would say, I believe in God, that God created the universe and everything in the universe, and that God is also personally involved in the universe. So that's what a theist would say. A deist, and I'm simplifying this for the sake of time, by the way. So deists would say, I believe that God created everything, but I don't believe that God's involved in it. In fact, so a deist would say God created the universe and then walked away and left it to itself and to its own devices. And so God's no longer involved, we're on our own. A pantheist would say, and this is one that's not as obvious to people, but a pantheist says God is not outside the universe, but that God exists within the universe, the laws of the universe, the created thing, all matter, that God exists within, and that's how we know God. My best analogy for that is Star Wars. What was the big line in Star Wars? May the Force be with you. Use the Force, Luke, And so that idea that the Force is all around us, that was, a pantheist would say, God is all around us. We just have to harness God from within the universe. And then we move to an agnostic. And an agnostic is a person who says, well, I believe in the possibility of God, but I'm not sure. I have doubts. And because of those, if I don't have proof, I can't put all my eggs in that basket kind of a thing. And so they would say that. And then the atheist is the person who does not believe in the existence of God, or says they might say, I believe it's highly unlikely that God exists. Does that make sense? That might be also a fair statement for an atheist to make. And so I've been reading about atheism and reading some of the new atheism. And the thing about the lenses, though, is that each of those lenses changes how we see the world. And if I'm an atheist, and I have my atheist lenses on, it's going to limit how I understand and see the world. And I'm actually going to talk today about the limits of that lens. Because the atheist and the new atheism that's coming in vogue today is saying that, it's scientific reason and scientific proof and reason that we no longer need God, because we got all these proofs and explanations, and so we don't need God anymore. We don't need to believe in God anymore. And actually, the new atheism is saying not only do we not need to believe in God anymore, but they're also arguing that religion is bad for people and bad for society. Going back to 9/11. They would point to 9/11 as that's a reason we shouldn't have religion at all. And so we have to unpack that a little bit, because I don't think religion was the culprit. I don't think religion is at fault here. No matter what that religion is, that's not the problem. So we're going to talk today about what the limits of that lens is. So one of the things I want to point out that I think points us to what the issue is, and here's this next few minutes, this is where I need you to get a cup of coffee. It's kind of, not literally go get a cup of coffee, but I'm going to unpack some things, and I'm going to need you to think right now. Does that make sense? So this is not time for you to kind of wander or check your email or whatever, because I need you to stay with me for a few minutes here, because I'm going to unpack some things that all will make sense. Does that make sense? All right, good. I saw you take your cup of coffee. Yeah, take another sip right now is a good time for that. All right. Here's a quote from Alistair McGrath. He wrote a book called Why God Won't Go Away. He says this: the fundamentalist mindset, whether religious or secular, is characterized by dogmatic certainty about its beliefs that fails to acknowledge the limitations under which human reasoning operates. You got your mind around that one yet? Let me unpack it a little bit. So the fundamental mindset, see, anybody can be a fundamentalist. You don't have to be religious to be a fundamentalist. There are fundamental atheists as well. Fundamentalism is this idea in dogmatic certainty. Now, dogmatic certainty is when I say I'm right and everybody else is wrong, and you're not going to change my mind. I'm not open to trying on a different set of lenses. I'm not open to putting on another set of glasses. My glasses are the right ones, and you all are wrong. And it gets so dogmatic that it will even lead me to fly a plane into a building. That's how right I am. I would be willing to kill myself and other people because I believe that. That's dogmatic certainty. And I would suggest that it was dogmatic certainty. It was that arrogant assertion and that unwillingness to put on other lenses that actually led to tragedy at 9/11, not religion, not belief in the existence of God or not the existence of God. Does that make sense? It's that attitude that did it. It's that mindset that did it. And that's part of the problem with the human condition. And so when we fail to acknowledge that, when we fail to admit that we could be wrong, we end up with things like crusades and holy wars. And we end up with tragedies, and we end up with things like Jonestown, where people committed suicide because they believed with dogmatic certainty that this was what they needed to do. And so we have these things. That's what happens to us. And there's a limit, so we have to watch our limits is what I'm saying. We have to not set ourselves up as the ultimate authority. Here are a few reasons for this. One reason, and one of the limits of this lens of atheism and even agnosticism is this idea that the thought that reason is all we need. Yet I would say that reason itself, if we set that up as our authority, our ultimate authority rather than God, it's not reliable, that's one thing, it's also not rational. So to put it another way, what I'm saying is, it's not rational to be only rational. Some of you got that. All right, that's good. It's not rational to be only rational. But yet that's where our society is going. All right, 3 illustrations, all come together, make sense in the end. Take another sip of coffee. All right. Human brain, your brain, my brain. Some of us, my wife doubts that I have one. But anyway, we all have a brain, right? MRI would prove that. So we've got our brains, and we have 2 sides of our brain. They're not like totally unique. They actually go together. Both sides, hemispheres work together. We need both sides of them integrated. They need, it helps us. And we have a left side and a right side. My dad, who was a left-hander, was always proud of saying, I'm the only person in my right mind because, left-handers are using the right side of their brain, right-handers are using the left side of their brain. And so he would argue that, and I still thought he was crazy. But so we got this left side. Now, the left side of the brain is the rational side, the reasoning side. It has a narrow focus. It pays attention to details. It's analytical. That's the analytical side, the practical side. Anybody know anybody like that? Yeah, don't point fingers. Yeah, right. Then the other side of the brain, which is the right side, that's the brain that's open to new things, new ideas. It's metaphorical. It's creative. Art, music, religion, all on that side of the brain. Or not all, but tends to that side of the brain. It would be inaccurate to say all. But there's a tendency in each side that way. Okay, you with me so far? So, they did an experiment. V.S. Ramachandran was a neurologist who worked with split-brain patients. Now, what split-brain patient is a person who they had to go in and sever the connection between the 2 hemispheres. They do brain surgery, and they do this because of epilepsy or some other condition of the brain. They sever the brain, so there's basically more individuality in each side of the brain. And what this neurologist did was he went to a split-brain patient and asked them this question: do you believe in God? And so what he was able to do was isolate out each side of the brain in the split-brain patient, and he had them each side respond by pointing with that corresponding hand to one of 3 answers on a board. And the 3 answers were yes, I don't know, no. So the neurologist asked the person, the left side of the brain, I'm going to make sure I'm doing this right. The right, we'll start with the right. Start with the right side of the brain. That's the creative side, the open, the art, and all that. So ask that side of the brain, do you believe in God? And the finger pointed to yes. So the right side of the brain says, I believe in God. Ask the left side of the brain, do you believe in God? And the left side of the brain pointed to no. Now, we ought to have all kinds of questions right now. Where does this person go after they die, for example, Who wins that? Which side of the brain wins, what's going to happen? But what that shows is that one side of our brain has the capacity of faith, belief. Does that make sense? More than the other side. I told you to stay with me. Did I not warn you? So hold on to that thought. Another psychiatrist, Ian McGilchrist, has been arguing recently that Western society as a whole is becoming more and more left-brained, practical, rational, analytical. That we as a society are moving more and more in that direction. And we're becoming more and more dependent upon the use of that side of our brains. Add into that the argument that he also argues, and that neuroscience is starting to uncover. There's this whole science of neuroplasticity of the human brain, that if we live out of that side of our brain, it tends to dominate the other side, which should be scary to us. Because if it's going to dominate, if we keep living out of that side of our brain more and more, we're going to lose the other side of our brain, literally. In our thinking, in our lenses, in the way we look at life, the way we interpret things, the way we make sense of the world. If we only depend on one side of our brain, we're going to miss out on a lot. That's the limit of science and reason. If we only live out of that side of our brains, we're going to miss a whole lot of things. Literally, we'll be only working with half a brain. You know anybody who's kind of half-brained, But that's part of it. We're only living out of half our brain. So reason itself, that rational side of us, is not enough for us to make sense of our world. We need both sides of our brain. Can I get amen now? That's the amen part. We need both sides of our brain. We need both of them to function and to be functioning. And so we need to practice on both sides and bring them together. The other thing is science. A lot of people say, well, the agnostic would say, I need scientific proof. Well, scientific proof, science never leads us to 100% proof. Did you know that? Science never brings us to 100% proof or certainty. What science does give us, rather, is science gives us the best explanation from the evidence during our time. For example, there was a time when the scientific community said, the universe, all those planets, all those stars, our world, the whole universe, it just is. It just exists. It's always been. It has no beginning. It has no end. It's always been here. For the scientific community, that was the basis of their understanding of the universe for a long time. Then some scientists came out and said, we've got this theory called the Big Bang Theory. And the theory is that we think the universe had a starting point, a beginning, and there was a cause, and this Big Bang happened, and that created the universe. And so there was a beginning, and it's still going on. And there was a moment where there was something created out of nothing. Genesis chapter 1. Now, who do you think had a problem with that theory when it first came out? It wasn't the church. It wasn't religion. It was atheists. The atheists in the scientific community were the ones saying, wait a second, some religious people got in here because now they're going to say there's a God. And we don't want there to be a God, so we can't buy into that theory because that says the universe has a beginning. It has a starting point. It has a cause. And if there's a cause, that means something or someone caused it. And so they had a hard time with that. And they actually attacked the theory until more and more evidence started to come out over time. And this is now the accepted theory. But the point is, science, at one point in time, based on their evidence and their scientific studies, were saying one thing, but over time it shifted and started to say another thing. And 20 years, 30 years from now, our textbooks may say something totally different. And that's what I'm saying about. So there's a limit to our ability to put our faith and trust in science for our understanding of the world. And then the third thing I would say is science does a great job, does help us make sense of the physical universe. It helps us to make sense of how the world and universe works. But it's limited in answering questions of meaning, purpose, truth, and ethics. Science can't take us to those answers. It can help us understand the physical world, but when it comes to morality, when it comes to ethics, when it comes to meaning, when it comes to purpose, it's limited. It can't take us there. It can't answer those questions. And so that's another limiter on science and reason. You know, I discovered as I was researching for this sermon that there was a tragedy that happened in the Soviet Union prior to World War II. Prior to 1940, based on Lenin's teachings and with Stalin, there was a very large movement within the Soviet Union, unknown by many people, that was led by the League of Militant Atheists to eradicate religion in their country. And so they weren't just not believing God, they wanted to get rid of God from culture and from society in the Soviet Union prior to 1940. And they began working on that in the 1920s. By 1940, here's some numbers to share with you. In 1940, the Orthodox Church priesthood in Russia had been reduced from 66,140 priests to 6,376 priests. They had been killed, put in prison camps, gulags, or exiled, or they fled into exile. That's 60,000 pastors that were killed, imprisoned, or exiled by 1940. By 1940, originally there were 39,530 churches in the Soviet Union. By 1940, there were 950 churches left. That's almost 40,000 churches gone. How many people have ever heard that before? A couple people, right? A couple of you knew some of the history. How many people have heard about the Crusades? How many people have heard about, Jonestown? How many people, obviously we've heard about 9/11, right? See, we're real good at pointing out how religion fails, or in the name of religion. But again, it's not religion doing those things, it's people doing those things. But we forget that atheists did the same thing as well. And because it's not about religion or atheism, it's about that human condition that we all have to want to get rid of God anyway. I always tell people whenever there's a tragedy, they say, somebody hurts them or somebody does something to them, or 9/11 happens, and they say, see, this is why I don't believe in God, because of what those people did. And I often say, don't confuse God with people. What people do is not God. In fact, we often fail to represent God well. We often fail to do what God would want us to do and to live the way God wants us to do. We are prone to fail in that area as a human society. And it's not God doing those things. It's not religion doing those things. It's, again, that dogmatic certainty that I think I'm right and everybody else is wrong. And really what it comes down to is that human part of us that says, I don't want to be under anybody's authority. I want to be in charge of my own life. I want to run things the way I want to run them. That's what Isaiah was saying. Isaiah was saying this same thing. He wrote, you turn things upside down. Shall the potter be regarded as the clay? Shall the thing made say of its maker, he did not make me? Or the thing formed say of the one who formed it, he has no understanding? Do you hear the arrogance in that? When it's like what we're saying is, I'm not clay, I'm the potter. Because we don't want to be under someone else's authority, whether it be God or an institution or a government or a teacher or whatever. We don't like being under. We're taught to question authority. Really what we ought to be questioning is the difference between healthy authority and unhealthy authority. There are good authorities and healthy authority that we need in our lives, and there's unhealthy authority. We need to do away with the unhealthy authority. But the good and healthy ones we need to keep, and we need to hold on to. And I think that God is a good authority, even though people have done terrible things in God's name. because they were representing something other than God. So we have to keep that in mind. I think another reason that people reject God is because of some personal tragedy or some personal hurt in their own lives. They blame God for something that's happened to them, or they're mad at God for something that happened to them. I run across this a lot as a pastor. The question is, why did God allow this to happen to me? If there is a God, if God does love, why? Why did this happen? And really we forget that it's fallen human beings that are often the perpetrators of this, not God. We're going to fail. We're fallen. We're sinful. We don't have it all together. We're not perfect. In fact, we ought to sometimes, someone mentioned to me this morning that sometimes they think we ought to apologize for our imperfections and just let people know right up front. If you're coming here expecting us to be perfect in the church, well, we want to just apologize right up front. I think it's a great idea because we're not. We're going to get it wrong sometimes, and we do get it wrong. But God is still a good authority for us, the God of the universe, the one who made everything. You know, I watched Nik Wallenda tightrope walk across the Grand Canyon. I don't know if you saw that. And I watched that, and Nik Wallenda had strung this tightrope out, and it was long. I don't even know how far it was. But how many people saw it? Did anybody get a chance to see that or highlights of that? And he was walking across that tightrope, and, you know, as he was going across, he prayed the whole way across there. And he kept praying to Jesus and talking to Jesus. And I got to be honest with you, I was saying, please don't talk to Jesus now. I said, keep it to yourself, because if you fall, everybody's going to blame Jesus. I wasn't worried about Nick. I was worried about Jesus, you know. Should have been worried about Nick. But all the way across, he's praying, he's talking, he's walking, he's praying and saying, oh, Jesus, help me. And he's praying himself across that wire. Now, the other part of me, the left brain side of me was going, you're crazy. My left brain was going, you know, that's what this dude's out of nuts, right? Why is he even out there? This is crazy, right? Because our rational side was saying, this guy's crazy. Doesn't make any sense to us. But he was trusting in his experience. He was trusting in that tightrope. He was trusting in some of the conditions. He was trusting in that. He was also trusting in God at that moment. I mean, he had to. As they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. Because there is that moment when our life is on the line where we have to start to really question, you know, life. But he was trusting in the midst of that. He had faith in the midst of that. And faith is very important, because faith enables us to put on a different lens. You know, when we look at those lenses, we see that an atheist and agnostic, what limits them from going to the other lenses is faith. Faith is required to put on those other lenses. You have to let go of science and reason and acknowledge the limits of that to take that step of faith, to go to that next level. Does that make sense? Faith is required for God to exist in our lives. It's an important part of that. Now, I can only imagine that if Nik Wallenda fell, what if he fell? What if he didn't succeed? Then my fear would have come true. The media would have had Jesus would have been all over the media. But I wouldn't imagine, just imagine for a minute, he fell to a tragic death. And there would have been all kinds of interpretations of that. I think there might even been some religious people, if the media had, because they would have been interviewing everybody, and if the media had gone up to a religious person possibly, and this is not what all religion would say, but one possible answer might be, well, why did God allow him to die? One answer, and I don't think it's a good answer, would be, well, it was God's will. I don't think that's a satisfactory answer. But equally unsatisfactory is the answer the atheist would give. Let's say they go up to an atheist, they put the microphone in front of an atheist and says, why did this happen? Why did this tragedy happen? And the atheist would say, well, the law of gravity. That's true. I mean, he was the guy out on the rope, right? I don't think that's satisfactory either, because it doesn't answer the question why at a deeper level of meaning and purpose. And is there a hope beyond this life? I think a better answer would be, I don't know. I'm not sure. Because, again, it's not about my dogmatic certainty. It's about me trusting that there is a God who does make sense of this, and one day that I'm going to know that. But I do have this hope, and I do have this faith, and I do have this assurance that Nik is with God. And Nik, there is a future for Nik that's beyond this life. And that's what my hope and that's what my faith teaches me. I can't prove it to you, but I believe it to be true. And that's what Hebrews 11:1 says. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen." That's what faith is. It's what we hope for. And it's the conviction and the belief that says, I'm going to wear these lenses because it's my choice. It's my choice of faith that I put these lenses on. It's an act of faith to put these lenses on and to see the world this way. Can I prove it to you? No. You can't prove the opposite either. But this is how this is what my faith tells me to do. So I'm hoping that we'll leave here this morning willing to put on some lenses of faith and not just the lenses we've been taught to put on for most of our lives. Amen.